welcome to Mindful Makers, a show that celebrates authenticity and those who create with meaning and purpose in our modern world. Today's show is brought to you from Foundry, a progressive art and co-working space in the heart of downtown Dubai. I'm Sahar, your host for the show, and today we welcome a man who wears many hats and has made it his mission to preserve, celebrate and revive Arab identity and culture, not only through his brand, but through so much more, which we will explore in due course. The person I'm talking about is Emirati entrepreneur and culturalist Mohammed Kazim, co-founder of luxury footwear brand called Tamashee. Mohammed, welcome to the show. How are you? How's life? What's going on?
Hi, Sahar. Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. Full disclosure to our wonderful audience, Mohammed and I had a chat about recording a show together about almost a year ago, and life had other plans for us. It got very busy, and the wonderful thing about life is that somehow it always has its own way of working out. So here we are finally together today, recording a show that we planted a seed for about a year ago. I'm very, very happy to be here with you.
Likewise, and I think people can't see the fact that I've been nodding the whole time you've been saying that.
Now, I say Tamashee is a luxury footwear brand, but really, my interaction with it, my perception of it is that it is really so much more than that. There's elements of travel, there's elements of storytelling, there's elements of working with artists, and I imagine tons of research. As I see it, the brand has many faces. Would you care to give a little bit of context to our audience around that?
Yes, of course. I'd love to, actually. Basically, we started in 2014. And at that time, we started working on it much before 2014. But during that time, there's a lot of negative media to the region. So we used to always hear about Arab Spring, about terrorism, about injustice towards women, and the list goes on. And so I got together with my business partners back at that time, and we said we want to do something that counters this negative media. So, if you may, an opposing wave to this negative wave that's covering our region. So we decided we wanted to do three things, and those three things became our guiding principles, if you may, or our brand values. And that's what really gave the depth element to our brand. And at that time, when we put down those goals, we called them preserving identity, representing culture, and coloring lives. So the idea was to take a segment or a portion of our identity, hold on to it, but at the same time, redefine it in a way that we can represent the culture of our region to the rest of the world and also leave a positive impact in society. So that kind of is a summary of our brand values, which later translated into our collections. And we didn't know which product we wanted to do at that time. So we came across this sandal that used to be worn by our grandparents and great-grandparents, but it kind of disappeared in recent times, and maybe only a country or two still wear it in its traditional form. So we wanted to contemporize that, and no one was doing it in the way we envisioned it. So it started like that, and then with every collection, we decided we wanted to shed light on beautiful things from our beautiful peninsula.
I read somewhere that the sandal style that Tamashee has is very specific, and you mentioned that it was a revival of a very old style. I read that it was somewhere like 70 years old. That style had been out of fashion for over 70 years, and you kind of brought it back and gave it this kind of new look with the colors and the spaces and the details. Why was it that specific one that you were attracted to?
It's very interesting because when you think about the Arabian Peninsula, you immediately think desert landscape, and you think that most people were barefoot, and that for a large part is true. But also there's so much beauty and there's so much variety. This specific sandal was worn by, let's say, the people that were considered the higher echelon of society. So, you had the emirs and the princes and the kings and the sheikhs and the merchants and the businessmen. And the rest, of course, if they were nomadic, they were usually barefoot or they wore socks to protect their feet from the heat. So it was considered at that time a luxury. Although it wasn't as fancy as you see today. It was a very basic, very generic sandal. So we tried to study why it went out of fashion. And because it was so intricate in its design and so beautiful, we thought that we can do so much with it. It was also worn by men and women. So we thought that it's a beautiful thing to target both men and women through our footwear, and also do it in a way that is scalable and we can keep changing. And it was very unique, honestly. That was, I think, the major drive. It was really unique in its design. and we hadn't seen anything like it anywhere in the world. So it gave another edge to the sandal.
I love the fact that the word Tamashee is constructed from two Arabic words. Can you tell our listeners what the two Arabic words are?
Yes, of course. So basically, when we were coming up with a name, it was very challenging because we wanted a name that also is easy to pronounce by all cultures, and at the same time does not mean something derogatory in another language. So so we needed to make sure we cross check that. So in Arabic, meshi means to walk, and since we were doing footwear, meshi was the word that kept repeating in our brainstorming. And there's another word which is yatamasha, which means compatibility. Since we put together values for the brand, we had our guiding principles in place to tell us how to pick the name. And so we said we wanted something that mentions walking, but at the same time mentions compatibility. And when I say compatibility, we're trying to say that, in preserving identity, the past is compatible with the present. In representing culture, the regional is compatible with the world. And also in coloring lives, it's a commercial business or entrepreneurial efforts are compatible with giving back to the community. And this is what we were trying to highlight through the name. And so we came up with Tamashee. To our surprise, Tamashee in Japanese means soul, as in the soul of a person. Not the bottom of the foot, but the spirit.
It's very beautiful.
Yes, and so it worked out. It worked out really nicely.
Yeah, it translated and took care of the global concerns that you had around choosing a name as well, which I think is very important. You need to consider that when you're trying to create a brand and you want to give it meaning, but you also want it to be able to transcend cultures eventually.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And we live in such a globalized world now that I think it's essential we do that to make something relevant, especially if you're reviving something, and especially in a place like Dubai, right? You're working in the UAE, and Dubai has this energy that's very international. So you need to make it relevant, otherwise you'll be working in a silo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I love so much about Dubai, particularly because it does have this aspect of incredible cultures coming together, everybody meeting each other and combining their energy to create something new and interesting together. But what I'm really seeing come through in your brand is that you keep returning to this aspect of cultural heritage, the roots of the Arabian Peninsula, and how that can now move in the modern world. Because, in all honesty, having spent a lot of time here, I can see that our interactions with cultural traditions and heritage have been specifically guided in one particular dimension, right? You have the old part of Dubai. It's very beautiful. You have Bastakia, which is now called Al Fahidi district, which I love. It's one of my favorite parts of Dubai. And in fact, I loved it so much that I filmed a campaign there in a past life. And I think it's so magical. Whenever somebody comes here, I say, you have to visit that part of Dubai. It is important that you see all of this rich heritage that is there. But I also think that there's also space to have a conversation of, what does that mean moving forward, right? And I can see with your brand, you keep returning to that through your designs, through your research in color. And particularly, I can see the color turquoise coming through a lot.
Yes. I'd love to add some context to what you're saying, because it's beautiful, the fact that you realize that there's a singular dimension that's focused on, and a lot of it is either neglected or not highlighted. And there's obvious reasons for them. I mean, as a peninsula, not just Dubai, but as a peninsula, we've been geographically in the middle of the world, literally. So, people moving from east to west have to pass through us, and vice versa, north to south and vice versa. They have to pass through the peninsula. And usually most people wouldn't dare use the internal routes of the peninsula because it was rather arid and dry, and it involved lots of risks. So it was a coast that people knew and spoke about and maybe traded with. But because the coastline was an important stopping point, we were influenced by multiple cultures, and we were flexible and tolerant to accepting those cultures and adapting them in our own way to our lifestyles. And that context element got lost in very recent times because of the growth the peninsula went through after the discovery of oil. So we had to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of technology, in terms of spending, infrastructure, etc. So we kind of warped into this import mode where we started importing everything. So in the process, we kind of forgot that we actually have things that are amazing, but they just didn't go through that natural process of becoming relevant to today's world or developing with the times. So they were forgotten. Whereas most nations of the world had the luxury of developing their identity, developing a contemporary version of what they have. And so this created, I think, almost like an identity crisis, which probably gave rise to what we saw in the last 30 to 40 years in terms of extremism and other things, although a minority, but kind of took over the media and took over so many things. And it's interesting you mentioned Fahidi, which is Vistakia. So the Fahidi district is very dear to me because one of the first houses there was my great-grandfather's house.
No way.
So it's so interesting that you made this link.
That's amazing. So he lived there?
Yes.
Wow.
And it was one of the first houses there, and then it grew to bring in more merchants from different areas.
I actually would like to unpack that a little bit because we have quite a global audience for the show, and I think it would be very lovely to explain to them in some way visually what this district looks like. From my perspective, it's such a precious and unique part of Dubai because it's like taking a trip back in time when you're walking around there. And so much of the original infrastructure is preserved and intact. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it dates back to the mid-19th century. It's located close to the creek, which used to serve as Dubai's main trading port. And when you're walking around this district, you'll see buildings that are constructed from a range of materials like sandstone to palm wood to sandalwood and teak. And there are these beautiful wind towers, which used to serve as the air conditioning for the homes. These structures would capture the wind, tunnel it down through this chimney-like structure and cool the homes. And what I love about walking around that district is that it's incredibly calm and tranquil, and there are these winding alleyways. It's almost like a maze-like structure that echoes sounds and the birds are chirping. It's incredibly peaceful, but there are also these lovely cafes and there's a handful of shops and galleries. So you could really spend a lovely amount of time over there. And for me, that's great because it's so different from the angle of Dubai that is marketed to the world.
And even those little details like the narrow alleyways, etc., to us they seem like random things, but back in the day I think it was important that design followed functionality. And I think part of that is to create wind tunnels and windbreaks so that there's a constant draft in the neighborhood as well as inside the house. So all these little details and the thought processes that went into it to make this livable and comfortable, it was so intricate. But when we brush it off and say, those days. And I think the newer generation is looking now and is hungry for this identity, this ability to connect to something that talks about their story, but in a contemporary way. And going back to your question on the turquoise, or your comment on the turquoise color, this is the perfect link, right? So the turquoise color was in everything. When we went to museums and we tried to see the old clothes, we see black and white photos, so we assume that people in the past used to wear black and white. And we know that there was a surplus of black and white fabrics in the East India Company, so it would be dumped off into the peninsula because we didn't have much money to purchase back then. So people say, yeah, so black and white is probably our identity, so let's just wear black and white. But in reality, they couldn't afford to have a perfectly white kandora or perfectly white clothing. They had to stain it so that they can make it look natural and doesn't look dirty. So they'd stain it with pomegranate grinds, or they'd stain it with indigo dye or whatever they could get their hands on. And this is interesting, right? So indigo dye with time fades out to give you a turquoise color. That's one theory.
No way. Yes. I didn't know that.
Yes. So that could be one of the reasons why the turquoise was prevalent. We don't know. There's a lot more research that's required to understand where it came from, but it was in everything. So we use that to say the contemporary story of the fact that we are colorful.
Yeah, you are a very colorful brand. I mean, the one thing I really noticed about your products when I walked into your space over a year ago was the different combinations of color that you use in such a creative way, and also the vast range of color that's there. I love color, and I think it's such an important part of everyday life. I'm really into color psychology as well, and I think that we've had guests on the show that talked about the influence of color in the space as well. So I think to see that interpreted in such an old style of shoe or footwear but looking at it from a contemporary way, it really does bring the message home. And what I really loved about your space actually was that it didn't just stop at the product. It was throughout the customer journey, like in the fixtures and fittings of the shop, the little details that you had there, everything kind of tied in together to really make the person feel the journey of the brand in multiple dimensions. And I think that's one thing that I really want to unpack, is that you can tell the authenticity and meaning that comes through in it with what you're trying to create. Your co-founder is Munira, right? So
Yes.
she's based in Saudi?
Yes, Munira is based in Saudi. She's a graphic designer by background, so that helps a lot.
I could see that's a lot of influence from her side.
Yes, of course, of course. So basically, when we design and we come up with the stories, and Munira's journey was similar to my journey in the sense that we always grew up around a very diverse environment, and we always saw the lack of the ability to connect to something that's us, that's contemporary. And I think this is what made it a perfect match to business together, is that we had the same vision for the brand, the same goals for that we wanted to reach.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the point about the fact that there's color and there's details. And I think what we forget is Arabs, and in general, people who have a very minimal environment. So due to the lack of rainfall, we don't have much going on. Yes, we have beauty. We have deserts and mountains, but there's a monotone feel. And that monotone feel gave rise to attention to detail. Arabs perfected poetry even before Islam. And poetry was perfected in such an intricate manner is because they weren't distracted. They had a minimal environment. And this minimalism led to detail orientation. And I think in today's clutter, we forget that. And we wanted with the brand to go back to that. We wanted to go back to that detail-oriented touch in a way that's not tacky. It's detail-oriented, yet it's minimal and contemporary.
Yeah, I can really feel that. And your journey to arriving at the brand sounds very interesting, because you actually studied something completely different, didn't you? It was a master's in clinical engineering, if I'm not mistaken, in the States. Right. Talk me through that sort of aha moment where Mohammed, who had studied clinical engineering in the States and then came back to the UAE, and I believe you were working in private equity at the time, had this, I guess, epiphany to say, right, now is the time. I want to bring Tamashee into the world. What happened in that moment?
I wish there was like a single answer, but I think I can try to summarize it. So basically, I studied clinical engineering, biomedical engineering. I worked in the field for a few years. I moved back to Dubai in 2008, and I started working for a sovereign wealth fund / private equity in Abu Dhabi. And after that, I was always in healthcare, even during that time period. And I was very passionate about healthcare. However, growing up in Dubai and also growing up in a very, very diverse environment, not only in terms of the external environment, but also in the house. My parents having studied in India and Pakistan, although they're Arabs from here, going to school with people from all these different nationalities, speaking English, Arabic, listening to Hindi and Urdu, and you end up in a situation where you're like, okay, who am I? So this was a big factor in it. And I think Munira went through a similar journey, although she didn't grow up in Dubai, but she spent a lot of time in Dubai. She was living here until about a year ago. And she went through a similar journey in terms that she grew up in the States. Her dad used to work for the oil company of Saudi Arabia. And, she was also exposed to all these different cultures, moved back to the eastern province of Saudi, where it was, again, very diverse of people from all over Saudi working in the oil industry there. So, again, it was such a mix that we both were looking for that
connection, I guess.
Yeah, a connection. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we both reached a level in our careers where we thought we couldn't give back anymore. Like there was a wall that we hit. So it was the perfect time for her and myself as well to decide to explore what we're passionate about.
Yeah, roll your sleeves up and get something going with a creative flow to it.
Yep.
I can really relate to that, actually, because I think that there comes a time in your life where you start to relook at and re-examine what are your priorities and what is it that you want to contribute to the world in a way that means something, right? Mm-hmm. And I can really see that has been poured in wholeheartedly into Tamashee when you guys are working on it. There's also a part of Tamashee that I really found interesting, which was Tamashee Soul. And that included workshops and things like cultural consultancy. Can you take me through that a little bit? I mean, there's events, there's documentaries, there's so much going on with this brand.
Yes, and we're a very small team. That's why we're always busy. But yeah, it naturally evolved. The brand naturally evolved into different work streams, and I think partly was market dynamics, but also partly was the nature of the work we were doing. So we were, in order to preserve identity, represent culture, and color lives, we had to do research. So we'd go physically, because we're a very oral culture in the Arabian Peninsula. So very rarely we document things from our perspective. The information that's available out there has always been documented by Orientalists who visited the region years ago, and they probably documented one element or one perspective, whereas in reality we're very diverse. We're diverse in terms of tribes, in terms of geography, in terms of mindsets. So we wanted to dig deeper, and that made us go and spend time with tribes and actually get the culture firsthand, understand from their elders what used to happen and what happens today, and understand the differences. I think that's what gave birth to 3 work streams. And one of them was obvious, because when we used to travel and post about it, people would tell us, take us with you. And so that gave birth to our travel work stream, which for us is mainly a brand loyalty and community building exercise. And then the other work stream, which was natural, is we had access to information directly from tribes. And so we could translate a perspective in terms of design or storytelling that's very well rooted and yet gives you something very, very different. And this made it very appealing for entities to reach out to us so that we can give a narrative that's completely different but yet rooted. And that's how the other work streams were born. I think the most challenging thing in terms of this, and why many people haven't done it in the past, is that they either understand that perspective, the tribal perspective, or they understand the contemporary perspective. But given our unique blend, both Munira and I think we've been able to take that and translate it in a way that's understood in the contemporary perspective.
Yeah, I can really see that coming through. So you guys offer these fascinating and, I think, in a way, very fresh and new cultural tours where you take people to the depths of corners that people don't necessarily always think to go to, like up a mountain or corners of the Arabian Peninsula that aren't very well trodden on the tourist path. And they get to meet people that live there, they get to interact, they get to learn about their lives and have a much more enriching experience through travel. But you also are able to connect those dots, because otherwise they would be disconnected from a communication perspective, right?
I totally agree with you. And as you're saying this, I remembered an incident that happened on one of our trips recently. We were visiting one of the places that are highly marketed by Saudi tourism and the Saudi government. And we were with a group of people. And as we were passing through there, I noticed the signs that show that there's a camel crossing, so it may look like regular signs to people, but all of the camels had a line going through their neck. And I was waiting to see if anybody noticed it. So then when nobody did, I asked the question. I was like, did anyone notice the line that's going through the neck? And when you have government entities running marketing campaigns, they're not thinking about these details. But because we know the context, the context was that imagery and idols were completely forbidden in Orthodox Islam. And so to put that line now made it not an image. It's no longer a perfect image. So you're not, let's say,
replicating the true likeness of the camel.
Exactly. So for a long time, the narrative in that part of Saudi was that. So people asked for this kind of implementation of the road signs.
Wow, that's so fascinating. See, this is why our listeners need to check out Tamashee and hit you up for some really good cultural tours.
I'd love that.
When it comes to evaluating the journey that you've been on so far with the business, with the brand, and with yourself, what would you say your biggest learnings have been so far through living and breathing this business?
Oh, it's very challenging to answer that question because there have been so many learnings. And I think we've been around for almost 10 years as a brand. And before that, as working on creating the brand. But I think we've gotten a lot of, I can generically answer and tell you we've gotten a lot of sense for the market in terms of what people are looking for. What's promising is that people are more and more looking to move away from conspicuous consumption into actually caring about what they're using and what they're doing. So that's been a wonderful, let's say, shift that we've realized over time. It was much more difficult earlier to convince people to look for a story in a brand. But now the value proposition becomes a lot more evident. And I think this is something that we see happening in the world because of globalization and a lot of the, let's say, converging of identities. And so people are always looking for that different thing. And the only way we think it can really stand out is if you use unique, authentic content, and that you can get from studying the rooted cultures in every part of the world. So that's been one learning. Another has been we tend to follow rules always. Since we're born, we're taught we need to follow rules. And I think one of the things we decided to do is to not follow rules.
It's very naughty of you.
Yes, yes. But we wanted to break every stereotype. I remember when we launched our first collection, it was every men's line had a bright turquoise leather ring on the sides that, really popped. And this is a traditional sandal. And people are like, what are you doing? Why are you putting turquoise in a men's sandal? And we were sold out.
Because it's new, it's fresh, it's different. Like there's a need for that actually. So
Exactly.
moral of the story is, kids, break rules and you'll be happy with the result. Not all of them though.
Yes, exactly. We look, in the end of the day, we're still operating in the Arabian Peninsula, and we believe that you can't just be a rebel for the sake of being a rebel.
Absolutely.
But I mean, we're a very honor-driven society, and I think if you understand that respect and honor-driven society, then if you understand what constitutes as respectful and honorable, you can easily understand how to navigate. And because we're rooted, we understand this more than others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's an element of storytelling through that. So it's not just about the quote unquote breaking of rules. It's actually looking at something with meaning and saying, how can you enhance that journey? How can you make it more beautiful? Or how can you make it different? How can you add a new dimension to something that adds value to people's lives rather than reducing it? And that is the crux, I think, of what mindful makers do in this world. They look for ways they can add value and do that in meaningful ways that are authentic, that are able to move and grow organically through time. And they learn through what doesn't work and what works and adapt accordingly rather than sort of letting it go at the last minute because they think it's a failure,
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a lot about that. We've had so many ups and downs over the years, but I think like understanding the essence of something is so important. So I think maybe just to add some light to what I said about following rules, we always follow rules for the superficial value of it. We forget the essence of that rule. There is a reason why that rule exists. I can think of a social phenomenon. One of the things is people say, oh, Arabs are so racist. This tribe won't let you marry a girl from another tribe. But there was a reason, there was an essence for that rule. The essence for that rule was the tribe was the insurance network. So if I give my daughter to somebody from another tribe that I don't trust, who's going to be the insurance that'll make sure that this girl is going to be taken care of? Or this guy's going to be taken care of?
And this was historically what happened.
Yes, and that was the reason for, separating tribal ties, is because they knew that this tribe has a just leader and that my daughter's interests will be taken care of and she will be protected and she won't be harmed. And so it made sense. The rule made sense. But
Back
the rule in today's world, where the state has taken over and there's a justice system, the rule doesn't make sense anymore. So it's not really ethnically driven. So this is just one example. You can imagine how many of these exist. Understanding the essence of a rule is so important.
Yeah, the way that it's weaved into society, its roots, its origins, and therefore how it evolves over time, because that essentially is what we are on this planet, an evolution of cultures, societies, beliefs, everything together. And moving that through what we create in the world is really important too, because then people can relate to it. And I remember you mentioned something about how we don't have representation of good products in sort of duty-free that represent the cultural aspects of the country.
Oh, yes. Not just the duty-free, even in our high-end malls.
Mm.
And I think part of it is because we're just on pure, let's say, commercially driven. So it's fine for now because it's working. But eventually you have to differentiate your products, especially when the whole world is moving towards this, let's say, almost like a perfect competition. You need to differentiate so that you stand out. And the only way you can do that is through local content. And there are good examples, but they need, I don't say they need financial support, but they need access. And if they're given access, they can shine. I mean, I can just imagine, like, we're trying to create a community now, and that community is going to house all different kinds of similar brands that offer culturally relevant items in a contemporary context. But imagine if we could do that on a larger scale. If we had the access to, let's say, a prime location in Dubai Mall, if we had access to airports, and I'm not saying for free, we'd definitely give part of our sales and part of our profits to them. But if we had that access, then we get incubated so that we can, not incubated, that's the wrong word, because incubated has this perception of, I need help. No, I need access. And
Yeah, a platform,
a platform.
a space.
Yeah. And if that platform is significant enough, everyone can shine. And that's how countries were built, right? In Dubai, when we first started, we weren't perfect. We had so many issues. We made iterations to rules, etc. So I'm sure brands would go through a similar journey. Yes, there's a minimal viable accepted standard. But then after that, there's going to be iterations. When we started, we had no idea what we were doing. If you tell me how we sold our first collection, I'll look back and be like, I have no idea how people bought it. And where we've come today, 10 years later, so many iterations over time, and we keep changing. We're nowhere close to perfection.
How many collections do you drop a year? I heard somewhere it's only 2.
Yes. So we do 1 to 2, depending on many things. How many models we release, depending on the Hijri calendar, because we adopted that as our cycle. So we're a sandal brand. So it's not really like a winter and a summer collection where, people wear sandals all around, at least in Dubai. It doesn't get too cold. But yeah, so we adopted the Hijri calendar, and we try to release one every Hijri year, one major collection, major theme. And then we do drops, which are relevant to the theme. So that's how we've been working.
And how do you select your partners? I know that you partnered with Level Shoes, for example, in terms of creating specific limited editions for them, which I thought were really pretty. And I think there was also other partnerships that you have in Saudi Arabia. Is that correct?
Yes. For us as a brand, I think our strengths and, let's say, competencies lie in designing, storytelling, and manufacturing. And that's what we try to avoid ourselves being involved in retail. So we try to look for partners that have perfected that space. And Level Shoes for us was a no-brainer. Like we said, if we don't get into Level Shoes, we won't even launch as a brand. We'll try to find another strategy when we were first starting. So association was an important factor. So we had to see what other brands they are keeping or shelving. So we want to make sure that we're in this, associated with that level. So that's been an interesting part of understanding how to select a partner. So association was number 1, and also if they knew what they were doing and they knew their space. When we first started, we also had access to places like Saks Fifth Avenue. In Bahrain, we had Harvey Nichols in Riyadh, a few other places. And once we were established as a brand, we decided to focus on where commercially it made more sense. So now we're still with Level Shoes. We're the most loyal to them. We started with them, and I think it's the least we can do. They're the one who gave us a platform. And of course, our online channels have really picked up since.
Yeah, I can imagine online is where you can tell a lot of storytelling as well and create a lot of content and integrate all of the wonderful aspects that hold the brand together as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming to you as sort of the co-founder of the brand, I imagine with all the hats that you wear and all the things that you need to think of, plus the cultural consultancy on the side, you must need some downtime. What are the things that bring you into a space of peace when you need it the most?
I wish I was doing it at a larger scale or more. I wish I was doing it more. I think I need it much more than I do it. But I think one of the things I found out quickly is when I started traveling for research, is that I really enjoyed connecting with rural populations, and specifically mountain and mountain farmland. I don't know why I felt a connection that's very strong. It could be the energy of the mountains. It could be something somewhere in my genetic code.
Something that's connecting to you to that part of the earth.
Yes, and I think that for me has been amazing. And in our peninsula, although we have mountains in the UAE as well, our highest mountains tend to be in the southern part of the peninsula. So that's the place I find myself at peace in. And I'm very fortunate to have worked with some of the amazing people of that region, and so I feel even more at home when I go there because of the people I surround myself with. But yeah, mountains and mountain farmlands, as some reason, give me peace. And recently, I've discovered craniopsychotherapy, and it's been amazing.
Wow. Tell me more about that. I've heard about it a few times, but I've never actually experienced it.
Yeah, it's so the way it works is it somehow works on your cerebrospinal fluid. I'm not sure exactly the science behind it, but it kind of brings you back to equilibrium, allowing your body to have enough resources to replenish. And your body does everything. So it just kind of recalibrates you.
Wow. The body is a very intelligent thing, isn't it? I will look into that actually, because when I was at university, my friend, she used to go and see someone for craniosacral therapy. Oh, God, that's a mouthful. I don't know how you said it so eloquently earlier.
I didn't even add the biodynamic part.
Yeah. I remember she used to go on a weekly basis and loved the effects of it. And I could see her well-being just shine because of it. And it must definitely work on some deep level on the person's body.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much we don't know, and it's important not to dismiss the things we don't know.
Coming from a clinical engineer, I think that's a very, very key statement, guys.
I hope I have some authority in this.
You definitely do. So you've got that aspect of travel, you look after yourself. Do you find that that helps you pour back into the business, or is it something that you just simply do for your own satisfaction?
It's a combination. I think most of my travels within the peninsula somehow get linked to business. So we recently launched a collection on Al Jouf, which is a northern region of Saudi bordering Jordan. So it's the Transjordan Desert, if you may, and that area is very, very unique. So initially, when I traveled there in 2018, it was because I had a friend from there and I wanted to explore the region. I heard that there's good olives that come from there. So I went there for that reason, but then eventually it turned out to be an essential part of our research, which we used to design a collection, 5 years later. So I want to say it's a combination, but when it's outside of the peninsula, of course I do it because of my passion to explore. So, I've recently been really interested in Central Asia, explored a bit of Uzbekistan, a little bit of Tajikistan, and hopefully a little bit more going
Oh, I
forward.
saw your Instagram posts around traveling over there. It seemed fascinating. And the food, my goodness.
Yeah, I love food.
Yeah, who doesn't? The food looked incredible. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Everything is so fresh. It's very ingredient driven rather than spice driven. And also, they're very similar to Arabia because a lot of the Central Asian countries are desert landscapes. So a lot of the arts and crafts that have been established there, the religion element, etc., they're so similar to the Arabian Peninsula that it resonates with me.
You find that that helps you also, I guess, pour back into the business in that way, as well as yourself. So you're filling both cups at the same time.
Trying. It's a good excuse, though.
Yeah, definitely. That's been incredibly fascinating and so educational. I've learned a lot from what you've said, and I think it will also help me look very differently at the places I go, the people I interact with, and the way in which I view cultural heritage in the region going forward. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
Mohammed,
Sarah.
for that.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for your amazing questions and giving us this platform.
We're not done yet. Now I've got some two sneaky questions that I like to ask all of my guests before they go. And one of them is, if you had a song that would embody the spirit of Tamashee, what would it be?
So I purposely didn't prepare for this. Full disclosure. But as we were having the conversation, there's one song that kept coming to my mind. And that song is an Arabic song. It's called طفلة عربية, which means an Arabic child, a female Arabic child. And the song that I like to listen to is by one singer called Talal Maddah, but the poetry is an old poetry, old Arabic poetry. And it describes different aspects of this Arabic child and talks about the different regions of the peninsula and how each area of the peninsula is known for something, some trait, physical trait, and also some trait that's not physical. So, for example, like generosity or... So the song goes into details, the words of it go into details about the different parts of the peninsula, and all of it is so beautiful. And I think as we were having a discussion, this was the thing that kept coming. Yes.
Oh, that's lovely. It actually sounds like a perfect reflection of your travels and the way you describe them to me as well. Like the essence of it, the experiences, like in little doses. It sounds like what you're telling me in this song is a way to kind of embody that as well.
Yes, and the tone of the song is a little flirtatious. So I think for me, that is the kind of relationship I have with the peninsula. I kind of, with my travels, flirt with it. And
That's so lovely.
And I think that's what connected most with me.
Yeah. It's also probably why it makes you feel grounded and it makes you feel like you're inspired whenever you do it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And next question would be, if you were to take one item to the moon with you, which one would it be and why?
So my friends make fun of me. I have recently gotten fond of a beautiful axe that used to be made by the northern mountain people of the UAE. And it's such an intricate tool, although it looks vulgar because it's an axe, but it is yet adorned with so much beauty. It has intricate shapes and designs, and it's molded into an alloy of different metals, and it's put together on this beautiful stick sourced from a local tree, and then it's dyed using local dyes. So for me, this tool, this axe, it's called a yirs or a jirs, in our accent, a yirs. It embodies the peninsula so beautifully. The access to materials, to art, functionality, although vulgar looking from the outside, yet so peaceful. It's not a threat. It's used for getting wood and carrying items, and I think it just beautifully summarizes this. And I'm 100% disclosure. I swear I didn't think about this before this question was pitched to me. So I just thought about it right now, and I think it's the one that stuck to me, because I've realized that my friends make fun of me because I use the axe, and I have it in my car.
It's like your permanent companion.
Yes, and I've gotten into trouble with some customs before.
Oh dear.
But I always tell them it's culture and they let me go.
That's a fantastic story. I love it. I really want to meet this axe. You need to introduce us.
I'll be honored. We actually did a documentary on some of the last axe makers that still exist.
Wow.
And it's on YouTube. It's subtitled in English, so people can see.
Lovely. I'll put a link to that in the show, actually, in the show notes.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mohammed, for coming on the show today, for sharing your knowledge, your passion, and opening a much needed window for some fresh air into what it means to explore culture in this region. Like I said earlier, I mean, we've got listeners from all over the world, and I'm just so happy and grateful that we were able to share this moment with them.
Thank you, sir.
Which brings me to thanking you, you lovely, curious, and open-minded listeners, for being with us this week. Thank you so much for sharing your time. We do not take it for granted, and I appreciate every single one of you. So if you'd like to know more about Mohammed and Tamashee, then check out the show notes for more details. And if you like what you heard today and fancy taking this journey further, then of course click subscribe or follow us on Instagram at sorsha.edits and let the world of mindful makers become part of yours too. Until next time, stay open, stay mindful, and I'll catch you on the flip side.